Hey, welcome back to the Conservation Cooperative, a production of the New England and New York chapters of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. I know we've got a bunch of new listeners here, and it's been a little while since I've laid out the premise of the show. Oh, and thank you for joining us, by the way. Conservation Cooperative is a show about conservation, but not the kind you typically hear. This is about real, collaborative work that happens on the ground to protect North America's outdoor heritage. We're here to share not just our own perspective, but the voices of those who live, work, and care for our wild public lands, waters, and wildlife. Because the more we listen, the clearer the picture becomes, and the more effective we can become as conservationists. This episode is a great example of the kind of collaboration that can and does happen between state agencies, academic institutions, and NGOs. We're about to dive into a recently launched study on Rhode Island's wild turkey population, a project that's set to tackle the unique management challenges that come with turkeys living everywhere from busy city blocks to quiet rural farms. We'll be hearing from a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Rhode Island and a state upland game bird biologist who, along with colleagues and organizations like BHA, are all working together to understand this iconic and increasingly in-your-neighborhood bird.
Yep. So my name is Lizzi Bonczek, and I work for the Rhode Island Division of Fish and Wildlife as the upland game bird biologist. So my program covers a few different species. Pheasants, we have a stalked pheasant program, American woodcock, mourning doves, and of course, wild turkeys. So just, work on stuff related to management, hunting regulations, hunting seasons and bag limits, and all that kind of stuff. I've been here for, I think, about 3.5 years now. And before this, I had gotten my PhD at LSU working with ducks. And before that, had just done a bunch of seasonal jobs all over the country working with game birds.
And now meet Dylan Bakner.
So I have been working as a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Rhode Island over the past 2 years. And pretty much what I do there is work on a whole range of different bird projects to ideally inform the management of things like turkey, waterfowl, and some non-game species here within Rhode Island.
Dylan also completed his PhD at Louisiana State University and worked with ducks, wood ducks to be specific. And I guess you could say that Lizzi and Dylan have a little bit more in common.
I guess this is the fun part where I can say I was drawn to Rhode Island because I moved here with Lizzi and we got married.
I asked Dylan how he came to be a postdoc at URI.
When I moved up here out of my PhD, there really wasn't much of a plan. I was coming here because Lizzi got her dream job, and a friend of ours, Tori Mezevich-Quinn, who was a PhD student at the University of Rhode Island, basically just told me, hey, start showing up here to our lab meetings and stuff. And I kind of just, I don't know, the way I like to describe it is elbowed my way into a job at the University of Rhode Island. And yeah, I started out working on a count data set for some water birds that they had across the state, where they were interested in looking at how birds are distributed across the bay in relation to oyster farming, basically. And I started out with that. And then Lizzi and I started working on this project and getting it off the ground. And that took about a 1.5 2 years. And now we're finally out there collecting some data and got grad students and everything.
I suspect Dylan is selling himself short here. It takes more than elbowing oneself into a postdoc position, but it's a great example of the value of networking and showing up, especially in the wildlife and conservation space. Now, before we talk about the specifics of the study, we need some context. Here's Lizzi with some Rhode Island turkey background.
Bringing it way back, turkeys, I'm sure you're aware, and a lot of folks are aware that turkeys were almost extirpated up here in the Northeast, and it was a whole to-do to bring them back, a whole reintroduction program across the region. Rhode Island was pretty late to the game in that, actually, and started their first introduction in 1980, and then their first hunting season, I believe, was 1986, and then had another kind of batch of reintroductions from 94 to 96. A lot of other states have started all this turkey research years and years ago. So again, we're late to the game. But I came here and just there's all this basic knowledge that you really should know in order to establish your seasons and your bag limits. We didn't have the exact answers to those. So we mostly monitor our turkey population through some surveys. So just kind of looking at trends. Like we have a spring gobble survey that mostly is focused on state lands. We have our summer sighting survey, which is a standardized protocol across the continent. We use community science to look at poult per hen ratios and stuff like that between July and August. And then we obviously have our harvest data. We can look at that and see how the populations are doing, but we don't have those specific answers to nest survival or brood survival or actual harvest rates or anything like that. So it was kind of some low-hanging fruit, I guess, for us to just start getting those answers. I kind of was saying to myself, honestly, it's a little boring. Everyone's already done this before. So how do we take it to the next level while also getting the answers that we need? And in Rhode Island, we have these centers of development and turkeys in cities. I mean, there's turkeys in Boston, Providence. And so I'm like, well, what about those turkeys? How do those turkeys relate to our turkeys that are in those more rural, less developed kind of areas in the state? So now kind of the whole theme of the project is looking at all of these vital rates and comparing them between the turkeys in less developed areas to those turkeys that are in urban and suburban areas.
Another objective here is figuring out how to better manage these birds when they're living right alongside us. Because here's the thing, when you've got lots of turkeys roaming around places packed with people, you're going to run into problems. It's just inevitable.
One of the questions too, from a management perspective, are there things that we can do to manage these urban turkey populations? Because they cause human health hazards to elderly people. Lizzie and I were both chatting with a lady last year who was older in age, and she had this turkey that harassed her going to her car every day, and she was worried about falling over and breaking her hips. So it's a real problem. It's something that's easy to think about rolling your eyes at when somebody calls and complains about a turkey. But, to certain people, it's a real problem. And we have questions about not only how are these, we'll call them city birds, moving into more country landscapes where they're able to be harvested. When they're moving across this urban to rural gradient, how do we see things such as reproduction increase or decrease, or what are the survival probabilities in moving across that gradient during the hunting season, outside the hunting season? So really just trying to get this full-on picture that really takes the movement ecology of this species and scaling it up to things about survival and population changes.
This study ultimately integrates data from a number of different methods, some of which require you to get your hands on birds. For instance, putting a GPS VHF transmitter or a traditional bird band on a turkey, or collecting biological data and blood samples. While there are plenty of proven techniques to catch turkeys for research purposes, these techniques don't always lend themselves to the landscapes Lizzie and Dylan are working in.
We had all sorts of spots that we were setting up. I was baiting behind a liquor store in Warwick. So I was like, oh gosh, I hope no one calls the director when they see a state plate at the liquor store. Typically to capture turkeys, we use rocket nets. So they're big 40 by 50 foot nets propelled by explosives with this big honking metal kind of tube that the explosive sits in. And you're limited there by your space, your safety. You have to make sure you're not pointing a net at houses, stuff like that. So when it came to catching these urban suburban turkeys, a lot of the places that turkeys were, you could not fit a rocket. So that was definitely like a challenge and something that we had to tease apart. We had a drop net that we didn't end up using, but we have that tool in the toolbox. And then we actually it was the grad students who came up with this, is that we had a tub launcher. It's just like a small net that shoots out of a tub with much lighter weights and uses a 308 blank. And that's been used other places for turkeys and, sage grouse and ducks and stuff like that. But I kind of forgot about it. And it was the grad students who said, hey, I think this is the ticket to catching these city birds. And it was. So that was, you could get that in a lot. I think the net is 20 by 20. It's not going to fly as far with that, the 308 blank, stuff like that.
Before you can even think about dropping nets on a bunch of turkeys, you've got to know where they hang out and how they move through the area. And that's where BHA steps in. Members like Mike Woods gave Lizzi the inside scoop on turkey locations, filled her in on the habits, and even did some good old-fashioned door knocking to get permissions for captures. Because let's be honest, knowing where and when the turkeys will show up is half the battle. I guess it's kind of like hunting turkeys. Anyway, Mike and other volunteers also got to take place in some of the captures, helping the team collect data and by putting bands and transmitters on birds. Mike told me, and I'm really jealous, he even got to push the button on the tub trap a couple times. So, this study is off to the races. The graduate students who are part of the project are putting in long hours keeping tabs on the birds, especially as the hens nest. Knowing the location of those nests will allow for even further data collection, all of which gets factored into what's known as an integrated population model. Here's Dylan with more.
The end goal of this project, or one of them, is this thing that has become more popular over the last decade, being an integrated population model that we're gonna work on. And so essentially how these things work is you do a project, collect data on basically three things. One being you need data to estimate survival, another to estimate reproduction, and then a third for abundance. And so there's lots of ways in which we can put these kinds of models together. But the idea is that we're going to have transmitter data to have lots of different estimates of survival. For example, survival during the breeding season for females, wintering survival for females, right? It goes on, the combinations. And then we'll also have reproductive metrics like nest survival, brood survival, maybe a count of poults that survived in each brood. And beyond the transmitter data, we have all the things that Lizzi talked about. So we have these summer sighting surveys where the public's reporting counts of females with broods, etc. And then this gobble survey. So at the end of this project, we're going to have lots of different ways to estimate important vital rates. And the idea with this integrated population model is to put them all together into one model to understand which of those vital rates are actually driving the population. So for example, this could mean that out of all of the vital rates, adult female survival is the most important to allowing the turkey population to grow or stabilize, right? And then having that information in hand, the manager, Lizzi, right, then knows if I want to manage for stable turkey populations or increasing turkey populations, whatever it is she would want to do, I need to do on the ground work to do my best to increase adult female survival. And that's just a hypothetical situation, all of that. I'm just kind of laying out the different options that we're going to have and the different outcomes that may arise, and then an example of what Lizzi could do then to conserve the turkey population.
So that's it right there. The ultimate goal of all of this, all of the cooperative work, is to better manage and conserve a resource by giving the state agencies the tools needed to do their job better than before.
I have really, over the last few years, started thinking about the science that I do and how is it going to result in putting something on someone like Lizzi's desk, right? Somebody else's desk that they can actually then take and use to do something with. And so that's always my goal in any research that I do now, is being able to actually deliver that product that has clear implications for the biologist to use.
There's so much to love about this project. First, I'm genuinely excited to see URI and its faculty diving into real-world conservation and ecological research. When universities connect this with state agencies, it actually moves the needle on conservation. Second, major props to the Rhode Island Department of Fish and Wildlife for letting their staff get involved in scientific research that directly supports their management work. As we've talked about before on the show, that's not always a given, but when it happens, it leads to better conservation outcomes and keeps the best wildlife professionals engaged and satisfied in their jobs. And then there's also the NGO involvement. I mentioned how BHA has been backing this project, but we're just one piece of the puzzle. NWTF is supporting another part of the study that looks at infectious disease and how it might affect turkey and other wild bird populations. It's this kind of collaboration that really makes conservation work. This is what it takes. Well, that's it for this episode of Conservation Cooperative. A big thank you to Dylan and Lizzie and their respective employers. Be sure to check the show notes for relevant links related to their work. We have so much stuff going on right now at Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, and we need your help to fight the good fight. If you're not already a member, become one today. Get connected with your local chapter, show up at an event, answer our calls to action, and if you can, make a donation and help us build capacity. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, take care.